seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay up. Oh my God! 30, 10, touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! Ah! What a miracle finish!
Hey, what's happening? The State of Purple podcast. We're back again. What up, Wolfpack Tegan? Tegan in the chat. Again, interactive live chat, recorded podcast today. If you want to take part in our conversation about the Minnesota Vikings and their week number 2 loss to the Arizona Cardinals, hop on in that chat, whether you're watching on Twitter, Facebook, Periscope. Periscope is Twitter, but whatever. Twitch, YouTube, wherever it is, hop in that chat. You can be part of the conversation. We'll pull your conversation and comments up, just like Wolfpack Tegan. What up, Wolfpack? Thanks for joining us. Jack Day, AJ Mansour. Jack, 2 days removed from a devastating loss in Arizona. How you feeling, man?
I'm feeling cautiously optimistic, I think is the best way to put it. I think, with how the game ended, it was just so frustrating. Obviously, go back and listen to the post-game show if you want to hear us kind of in the moment talk about that game. Right. But I do feel good, which is a weird feeling heading into the Seattle game, just getting this team back in front of a sold-out crowd, 70,000 people doing the Skol chant. I think it's going to create a little bit of an edge to this team. And I know everyone's seen the stats. I think Russell Wilson is like 7-0 against the Minnesota Vikings in his tenure in Seattle. But I have a weird feeling that this game could be a positive game for the Minnesota Vikings. And not only do I feel like it is going to be, I think it has to be if the Vikings want any chance at kind of redeeming and revitalizing this season.
Well, he might be 7-0 against the Vikings, but that whole trajectory could have changed if in 2015 Blair Walsh makes that kick and the kicking problems for the Minnesota Vikings didn't continue at that point. We'll get to that a little bit later. But, Jack, let's review. Again, Sunday afternoon, right after the game, 10 minutes after the game, we give you our first initial reaction podcast. Then Tuesdays, we sleep on it for a couple of days, ruminate maybe a little bit, and then come back to give a level-headed review of the week that was. Before Thursday, we come back on and we preview the week coming up. So this week here, this podcast here is all about the loss to the Arizona Cardinals before we turn the page and look to Seattle. We'll do that on Thursday. Jack, we have had a couple days to sleep on it. You mentioned that you were feeling cautiously optimistic. I want to get into that a little bit because I think I'm feeling the same way. I just posted an article. You can find it on my Twitter claiming that the Minnesota Vikings are the best 0-2 football team in the NFL. Before we go any further, Jack, let me list these 0-2 football teams, and you'll see why this is not a preposterous statement, despite what people are nominating me for on Twitter right now. It is the Detroit Lions, the New York Giants, the New York Jets, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Indianapolis Colts. That might be it. I feel like I'm missing one more. Oh, the Atlanta Falcons, another 0-2 team. Outside of Atlanta, who can be decent, obviously very flawed, and Indianapolis, who is kind of that mediocre team that's 0-2 at the moment. The rest of those teams are garbage. So I don't think it's a preposterous statement. Jack, correct me if I'm wrong. The Minnesota Vikings are the best 0-2 football team in the NFL.
No, I agree with you 100%. And it's just frustrating that we're to that point having that conversation rather than being, like Mike Zimmer said in his press conference, 2 plays away from being a 2-0 team. So I think the talent is there. I think everyone knows that the talent is there. Kirk Cousins is playing some of his best football, like we mentioned on Sunday's show. He has gotten this team back into the game twice now. He's led what should have been 2 game-winning drives. And you had the Delvin Cook fumble in Cincinnati and then the missed field goal in Arizona. And it's frustrating. But again, I agree with you. I think the Vikings are the best 0-2 team. It's frustrating that we've gotten to that point. But yeah, I think that's a fair statement to make.
Well, and that article, again, you can find it on my Twitter. I go into all those things, right? Kirk looking decent through 2 games, looking good last week and decent the first week. But in both those games had a 2-minute drive to lead this team to an opportunity to win. I mean, as silly as this is, purple-colored sunglasses, cautious optimism, whatever, they could be 2-0 against a bad team and against a good team, and it could be very different. So the way that this team has played, that first week when they lost, there were so many mistakes. They cleaned them up in the second game. The offensive line looked much better. The defense looked better. I guess they still had some situations, but there weren't those egregious, like outside of the one Rondell Moore touchdown, there weren't those egregious mistakes. There weren't all the penalties. You still have Dalvin. You still have Justin Jefferson. You still have Thielen. You still have Kirk. You still are a team that could compete on a week in and week out basis against any football team. And that's why I think they're the best 0-2 football team in the NFL. I don't think that, again, that's not saying a whole lot, right? They're still 0-2. One thing I will mention is you're going to see a lot, if you haven't already, about the statistics and the percentage of teams that have started a season 0-2 and how it's a really, really high uphill battle against their odds to make the playoffs. Just a quick reminder on that note real quick. Those stats are all from years past when there wasn't 17 games, when there wasn't 17 regular season games, when there wasn't an extra playoff team added to the mix. So this is a completely different landscape in this year's season, this division. You're still, you're one game out of the division right now. It's completely different than those statistics that you see. So instead of getting all doom and gloom, and I'll get doom and gloom tomorrow, I'm going to post another sister post to the one I put today, talking about how the Vikings are the most disappointing and potentially the worst 0-2 team in the NFL. We'll do that tomorrow. But today we're cautiously optimistic, like you mentioned, Jack.
Yeah, and I just wanted to touch, we can kind of wrap up here on that Arizona game. You just mentioned the Justin Jeffersons, the Adam Thielens, the Delvin Cooks, Kirk Cousins playing at a high level. There are other stars. I don't know if I'm ready to say stars yet, but there's players that are emerging or have already emerged over the first 2 weeks of the season. You see KJ Osborne score his first touchdown, and not only score his first touchdown, but be a critical point of that offense and that what should have been game-winning drive. And then we mentioned on the show Sunday as well that this linebacking core is going to get better whenever Anthony Barr comes back. I'm hopeful that is going to be soon. It was kind of weird to me now that we're at this point in the season and Anthony Barr didn't go on the IR at the beginning of the regular season, because I think it was like a 3-week span that he would have had to miss. And now we're entering that 3-week span. So I don't know if you want to put 2 and 2 together, if that means maybe they're optimistic that he has a chance at getting back out there. But kind of seeing Nick Vigil, especially in coverage, look solid through the first 2 weeks with Eric Kendricks. We know what he brings in the coverage aspect of that linebacking room. And I think I mentioned this on Sunday too. I think it's going to really be able to free up Anthony Barr and utilize him where he's best, which is in the run support. And hopefully in that 3-4 look that we've also brought up, maybe getting a little bit more looks at rushing after the passer.
Before we get into our next topic, Jack, I want to pull a question from the chat real quick. Wolfpack Tegan asks, do you think that the offensive line will continue to play as good as they did last game? They looked night and day different from week 1 to week 2. Their play in week 2 was good. They were opening holes for the running game. They were protecting Kirk. There weren't as many penalties. Is that the trend or is that the mirage? Will they continue to be a decent offensive line? And do they have an opportunity to get better when some of those injuries come back?
I do think they have. I think the trajectory of the offensive line, all in all, is going to start to increase and go upwards, especially whenever the time comes when Christian Darrisaw gets back. I know that's kind of one of the more frustrating things for Vikings fans right now, the first-round pick not being able to be on the field through the first 2 games. And Rashad Hill, has kind of been the weak link to that offensive line. I think he was the lowest graded PFF offensive lineman for the Vikings last week, and I think he also gave up the most pressures, if I'm remembering correctly. But I think it's going to get better, and it's the only thing that kind of scares me and pulls me back from saying that is they still have to go up against some pretty good defensive linemen. Akeem Hicks for Chicago has given Garrett Bradbury fits, and they have to play Aaron Donald at some point in the season. There are some monsters on the interior of opposing teams' defensive lines that they're going to have to go up against. I'm not saying that the Cardinals are an atrocious defensive line. I think they did a great job at kind of handling. I know Chandler Jones kind of made an impact on that game later on, but they were able to handle Chandler Jones. And I think that was the main talking point for us leading into that game, because he was coming off of a game where he had 5 sacks against what was supposed to be a fairly competent offensive line. So I think the trajectory of the offensive line is certainly looking good and going towards the right direction, but I still think it's kind of going to be a little bit of a roller coaster to get to that point. The good thing is it's all homegrown talent. It's a very young offensive line, and it's a long season. And I think eventually they're going to get to a point where this is going to, at the very least, start to look like a mediocre offensive line.
Yeah, the one thing we do know is week to week, that offensive line did look better. Also, week to week, Kirk Cousins looked better. It was a little bit of a padded stat with that long touchdown to start the game, busted coverage. But he finished the day with 122 passer rating, a couple touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, I think, got everybody involved. And again, the focal point where he has taken some crap in the past, and maybe the most important thing that we can remember and should remember from both these first 2 games is he has led the team on 2-minute drives to put them in a position to win both times. That's clutch Kirk, when we didn't always see that. So your thoughts on Kirk? We have both been on both sides of the Kirk conversation, supporters and detractors. We had jumped the bandwagon. Are you climbing back on that Kirk bandwagon right now?
I don't know if I would have fully ever jumped off of the Kirk Cousins bandwagon. I think what I said after that Cincinnati game was just how frustrated I was with the pocket awareness, or with his pocket awareness in Cincinnati, where he kind of just, there's that one play where he could have easily rolled out to the right and he just took the sack. Through 2 games, he is, I believe it was the 3rd highest graded quarterback in terms of PFF grading with the 85.9 grade. I think he's behind only Tom Brady and Jalen Hurts, who, oh, by the way, is one of those young quarterbacks that we brought up a couple weeks ago. 595 yards, 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, should have 2 game-winning drives, and a 71.6 completion percentage. So Kirk Cousins is doing everything in his capabilities of keeping this team in these games, and not only keeping them in the games, but he's doing stuff that we haven't seen before. He had that 30-yard scramble. That's fairly unheard of for Kirk Cousins. And then on that same series, I think it was the same series where he threw the touchdown to Justin Jefferson. He kind of escaped some pressure. The pocket broke down, and he was able to get outside the pocket and deliver a strike to Justin Jefferson in the end zone. That is kind of what we called for last week, and we saw it in Arizona. We need to see that continue. We can't have these weeks where Kirk Cousins looks like this for the first 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden comes out like he did last year in that Atlanta game where he just struggles. He has to continue this throughout the season. Otherwise, we're going to continue. Like I said, the same thing works for the offensive line. It's going to be a roller coaster talking about Kirk Cousins if he has one of those games. But up to this point, Kirk Cousins has been actually one of the main reasons that the Vikings have stayed in these games when I don't know if they necessarily belonged in either of them.
Yeah, no doubt. We kind of, I kind of, credit on Kirk there when I said that his numbers were a little padded because of that KJ Osborne broken coverage, busted coverage, long touchdown pass to begin the game. It could go the other way too, Jack. You could say that Kirk Cousins' stats are maybe not as good because people are dropping footballs. Cue the Justin Jefferson slide. Justin Jefferson, comparatively speaking, okay, last year he set a rookie record for receiving yards and had just a stellar season debuting for this team. This year, he had a touchdown this last week. He got some opportunities to get some yards, middle of the road yardage, wise for him. But we've seen him 2 weeks in a row now drop passes that he should catch, that any wide receiver should catch, let alone one that we think is going to be really good. Is there concern with maybe the new way that defenses are treating Justin Jefferson, or are we just waiting for him to acclimate to the double teams, or maybe for some of that to even out and go back to Thielen, because Thielen's been balling as well?
Yeah, I'm not too concerned. And going back to the Thielen and then KJ Osborne, what Justin Jefferson does, even if he's not getting targets, he's going to get targets. That's going to continue to happen. Kirk Cousins is going to have to continue to utilize him. He was the most exciting rookie wide receiver, not only the most exciting rookie wide receiver last year, but one of the most exciting wide receivers all in all to watch play football last season. That's going to continue at some point this season. If you go back to last year, he didn't even play in the first 2 weeks, and then he kind of turned it on week 3 moving forward. He was the true number 1 for this team. That is going to continue, but being a true number 1 wide receiver for any team, you have to realize what you're doing is going to benefit the offense. If you're getting double covered, that means Tyler Conklin is going to have single coverage. Adam Thielen could have single coverage. Someone might miss, or there could be a linebacker on Dalvin Cook, or you could see what happened actually on that KJ Osborne touchdown. You watch both corners kind of gravitate towards Justin Jefferson, and that's actually what freed up KJ Osborne running down the sidelines. That needs to continue if this offense wants to continue to find success. But eventually, Justin Jefferson, he will turn things around. I'm not too worried about the drops. Like you said, we said this on Sunday, they weren't easy catches that he dropped by any means, but last year it just seemed like he caught everything thrown in his direction. So watching a Vikings game as this year compared to last year, like, ooh, that seems like something Justin Jefferson would have caught. Right. One of them was, I think the one in Arizona, he was kind of diving and it was down the sideline on the left side, if I'm recalling. It was a diving play. There was another one in Cincinnati where Kirk Cousins kind of left it behind him, and he did one of these where it's a lot harder to make those catches, but it was weird because we were so used to him making those catches. But right now, 2 weeks into the season, I don't think there's really any cause for concern.
Right. And to be fair, we're also spoiled on the other side of the football where Adam Thielen basically reels in everything that you think that he shouldn't catch. And he dominates in that fashion as well. Another, change of tune, I guess, from the last couple of days and maybe the last couple of years has been Mike Zimmer in the way he's handling Greg Joseph and his missed field goal this weekend. Paul Allen highlighted today, he played a clip with Courtney Cronin of Mike Zimmer and his reaction after the Green Bay game a couple years ago when they ended up cutting Daniel Carlson, and how he handled that situation and how he handled Greg Joseph missing the kick this year, both after the game and in his Monday morning press conference yesterday. His tune this most recently with Greg Joseph was, he made some big kicks for us earlier in the game. Let's give him a break. Unfortunately, the kick he missed came in the most important moment of the game, but let's cut the kid some slack. Jack, are we concerned? This is the most Minnesotan question that we could ever ask. Are we concerned about the kicking game, specifically field goal kicking, now that Greg Joseph has left us feeling like Blair Walsh left us feeling like Dan Bailey left us feeling like Daniel Carlson, like Kai Forbath before him, like Gary Anderson and Fuad Revez, and we go back all the way here. Everybody misses these big kicks when it matters the most. Do we have a problem?
I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't concerned. I have one thing written down in my notes for this talking point, and it was the word always. I'm always concerned about our kicking situation. Even with him hitting those 50-yarders in Arizona and then in Cincinnati at a couple 50-plus yard field goals as well, I was still sitting there, like I said on Sunday, this feels like a 50-50 shot, and it's a 37-yard, not necessarily a chip shot, but that's a field goal that most kickers in the NFL should make. I mentioned after the last show that I can't really say anything positive about our special teams moving forward. I think we kind of jinxed that 2 weeks ago when we were talking, or a week and a half ago, whenever that was, when we were talking about the only positive to come out of that Cincinnati game was the great play by the special teams units. But I think there's cause for concern. And having said that, I saw some people on Twitter. It sounds like he had to turn his account on private on Instagram. He may have deleted his Twitter. I don't know if that's 100% accurate. I didn't dig too deep into it. But just wanted to mention something, that there's no reason people should be attacking this man on Twitter. He has a family that he goes home to. There's no reason. That's one of the things that just bothers me the most with this sport is these avid fans. I'm fine with people being avid fans, but leave players and players' families out of it. You don't have to go attacking a player, because I'm sure Greg Joseph feels a lot worse than the number one Vikings superfan does. So I think it was a good support system. I know Adam Thielen spoke some kind words about him. They exchanged the words "I love you" or something was said. So there's a good supporting cast, and I think there's a positive outlook. Again, it feels weird saying anything positive about it, but right now I think it's the best option the Vikings have, and they need to continue to kind of support him moving forward, because the moment that switch goes off and he loses support, I think that's when it starts to tumble even further downhill.
Right. And I think it probably depends how he bounces back, to be honest. I mean, this is the first time we've seen this from him, right? We saw other kickers who weren't able to bounce back. They continued to struggle. It kind of snowballed. And for some of them, it ended a career. For some of them, it ended an opportunity with this team. We'll have to see how he bounces back. I'm not to the point yet. I haven't looked up free agent field goal kickers. I don't know who's out there, who's available yet. Maybe give that one more big miss or one more bad game, and we'll start doing that. But it is an interesting situation. I know Minnesota fans feel cursed and feel like there's just a situation here with this team. Mike Zimmer has always had a little bit of a short temper with field goal kickers and special teamers in general. But at the same time, there's no better option right now. I mean, you said it. There's not like there's a different option on roster. I forget the name of the other guy they had in camp, but there was a kicker competition, but they cut that pretty short, right? That was one of the first cuts they made, was just giving it to Greg Joseph. So clearly something behind the scenes made them feel like he was the better option. So I don't think we'll see a change anytime soon unless it just continues to get really bad.
Yeah, and to take that one step further, We saw what happened with Daniel Carlson when he was out the door. Now he's kicking for the Raiders, a 2-0 team, by the way, and he's hit some big kicks. Like, it just seems the curse does feel very real, the kicking curse in Minnesota, but just kind of kicking him in the curb this early on in the season with no better options, I think it creates an even bigger recipe for disaster.
I am going to look in the chat real quick. Blah, 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 blah. Or David Haas. I pulled this one up early. Dave, sorry. Commenting on Zim and how Zim's play calling has become outdated. I'm going to extend this question for you real quick, Jack, and make it a little bigger. Some people, certain days I'm one of them, believe that Mike Zimmer, the game just has passed him by. The ability to coach in this day and age, some of that being his quick trigger finger with kickers in the past, some of it being the non-innovative play calling, whether it be on offense or defense. Now that we see the defense, has some holes in its armor, he's no longer just this defensive whisperer that we chalk up as one of the best in the league. There's issues there as well. At what point do we legitimately, we're talking about it, fans are talking about it already, but what point do the Vikings legitimately think about maybe moving on and just turning the page to something different?
I think at the very least, there's at least another 2-week window where Mike Zimmer is guaranteed a job coaching the Minnesota Vikings. We've had this conversation on past shows as well. If the Vikings manage to start this season 0-4, I think that's when the conversations start to happen from the top down. And it's not just a Mike Zimmer thing, it's a potential Rick Spielman thing. And then when you get to that point, it's a lot bigger than just your coach and your GM, because you have new faces coming in. And when new faces come in, new regimes come in, they want to blow everything up and essentially build the franchise again from the ground up, how they want to build it. I don't know if that does happen. Is it possible that Kirk Cousins is out of Minnesota as well? I know some people kind of put the trio together with those three, but Vikings fans need to be careful for what they're calling for, because the moment Mike Zimmer's gone, the moment Rick Spielman's gone, I think it calls for a complete rebuild for this team. Another friendly reminder that there's a lot of guys on this defense that are starters right now that are on 1-year deals. And then it's going to force, and this is kind of a segue into one of our next topics, it's going to force a lot of these rookies onto the field. And if they're not ready, the rebuild could be a little bit longer, and we could be looking at an even worse Vikings team over the course of the next couple seasons.
Yeah, I'm gonna respectfully disagree with a little piece of what you said there. Before we go on to talking about those rookies and the impact that they have there, I think most of those players that you're talking about on the 1-year deals are on the defensive side of the football.
Yes,
they're not performing right now. I mean, the defense is not. Danielle Hunter, who you have for a couple years, is really the only one who's been balling out. Eric Kendricks is in that situation too. But when you talk about these 1-year deals, it's not as if this defense is locked down. And if Mike Zimmer leaves, they leave too, and we're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? There's a lot of them, right? So there are holes that you will have to fill, but it's not as if we're looking at those names and saying, if Mike Zimmer leaves and Mackenzie Alexander leaves as well, what are we going to do? Like, whoa, oh no, we're going to have to figure out how to do that. Part of the reason they're in this position is because of the way that they draft and the way that they have made some decisions that haven't worked out. So, sometimes with Jeff Gladney, like, that decision was not necessarily a bad decision. He just made an awful decision off the field, and that changed he was a first-round pick, right?
Yes.
That changed a first-round cornerback that was expected to be a starter this year and got him completely out of the league. So some things you can't blame on them, but at the same time, the pieces that you have that we like about this football team, the ability to score points, the Jeffersons, the Thielens, the Dalvins, they're still there. They're under longer term deals. So I don't know that it would fully be a rebuild if they did flip the script. And what I think is that would make this job maybe one of the more attractive ones, right? You had a bum year this year. You're going to have a decent draft pick, probably not a high level draft pick, but you do have pieces. You look at Jacksonville right now, you had the number 1 overall pick in Trevor Lawrence, but that's about it, right? There's nothing else. And I think Urban Meyer is realizing that despite the fact that you had the number one overall pick, maybe this generational talent, there's a lot of holes to fill, and you're still not winning games because he's not ready. The team's not ready. That team is just way down here. The Vikings are up here still, even if they lose some of those 1-year contracts next year. So if they do move on from Mike Zimmer, and I don't know that there's a hurry to do it, right? We're not, there's no Kevin Stefanski within the organization. So we're not getting rid of him sooner rather than later to have anybody internally audition for that job. If they fire Mike Zimmer, they will hire from the outside. It will not be a promotion from within. There really isn't anybody that they're talking about that could be one of those next candidates, those high risers. They've had those in the past, but they're now gone. So it would be somebody from the outside. So I don't know that they necessarily hurry to fire him after an 0-4 start, but they might have made their decision, right? They might have made the decision that we're going to do it after the season. And I do think then that this would be an attractive job for somebody who is looking, and you're saying, okay, I can take this job. I don't know the situation for the Jets coach, but I could take this job, the Jets, the Giants, or the Lions. You know, if you're looking at the bad teams, I know some coaches are brand new with the Lions, whatever. This is more attractive than those teams. You know, there aren't many other options of coaches that would get fired where it's a more attractive situation to come in right away and compete, but also still be able to put your imprint on it and draft your own players and formulate it for the future. So I think that factors in as well, especially if a GM comes in, a new GM comes in. It's like a package deal like you're talking about. Let's go to the next one here because I'm sorry.
No, I just want to say kind of on the rebuild side of things too. And what I meant from that is if you do get a new regime, I think it starts not necessarily a full rebuild, because I agree with you. There are those star players that are already on the Vikings roster that makes it a lot more of a shiny head coaching job opening. But it just seems like when new coaches come in, more or less, they're going to want, especially if it's an offensive-minded head coach, which I think a lot of Vikings fans would be calling for. It seems like when they come in, they want to kind of have their handprints on everything and start from scratch at the quarterback position. That's more or less what I was talking about. And we're watching Kirk Cousins play some very good football right now. And then one other final thought process on Mike Zimmer. I still respect Mike Zimmer. I know this defense hasn't looked great, but I respect him as a defensive coach. But I'm starting to watch these games and kind of agree with you on this side of things where the game managing and kind of limiting what this young offensive coordinator might want to be doing. I know we're seeing more 3 wide receiver sets, which is a brand new thing to see in a Mike Zimmer-led team. But we need to see a more aggressive play style because we have younger head coaches that are coming in the leagues. You see, and it's not even just younger coaches. Harbaugh did it with Lamar Jackson, where they were like on their own 45 or own 40-yard line, and he's screaming at Lamar on the sideline, "Hey, do you want to go for this?" And it's like, they're keeping the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands and putting their faith in their star young quarterback and their team rather than giving the ball back to an opposing high-powered offense. And it always seems like Mike Zimmer has the faith in his defense, and he wants to do that and let his defense control the game rather than put the ball in the hands of his playmakers on the offensive side of the ball, who, oh, by the way, are outperforming their defense right now.
Right. A couple of years ago, that defense might have been able to have that trust, that level of trust. But right now, whether it's the injuries or the inexperience or early in the season, they just don't have it. Jack, you did mention the future of this team and the things that we're seeing. One of the situations that we're seeing, and I'm going to pull up a tweet here too, is a disappointment from the rookie class so far. A lot of third-round picks that you traded back for and you saved them and you weren't able to move up that haven't seen the field. We have a first-rounder that hasn't seen the field. Mike Renner, a Pro Football Focus writer, put out a tweet today that said the Vikings selected 11 players in last April's draft. None of them have played an offensive or defensive snap against the Cardinals this last Sunday. Clearly, there's some injury situations. Clearly, there are some acclimation situations. However you want to look at it, it's concerning when you have a big game where you know you're going to need to at least use fresh bodies and get people in and get people out. But you have a situation where there are 11 players that were added to this team. I'm not even sure if all 11 are still on roster, but however many of them are still on roster, not a single one of them got a single snap last week. And the ones we worry about and we think about and we talk about filling in didn't get a snap the week before either. That is concerning.
Yeah, and I'm not on that side of the spectrum. I saw a lot of guys. I know you had a tweet that sent out. I think Meat Sauce had a tweet that was sent out. I'm not ready to give up on this 2021 class. I'm not saying you guys are either, but just kind of going through, I don't think the Vikings can control what is happening with Christian Darrisaw. Obviously, the injury is frustrating because I think he is possibly the missing piece of that offensive line to kind of really get the full transition in motion. And then the no second round pick, that goes back to that unique Ngakoue trade, and we don't need to bring that up, but no second round pick. And that's been kind of Rick Spielman's sweet spot in drafts is that second round. Then you get into the third round, fourth round, where they have like, I think they had like 7 picks total in the third and fourth rounds, which you don't always see immediate impacts out of guys coming into the league in the third and fourth round. One of those guys is Kellen Mond, who we knew what the Vikings knew what they were getting into when they drafted him. He's a developmental prospect. You have Kirk Cousins still starting. He doesn't need to see the field yet. I think kind of some of the ones that are a little bit more concerning. I know Janarius Robinson got put on season-ending IR, but Patrick Jones not seeing his fresh legs out there, especially with Everson Griffin not playing, that one was kind of more concerning to me. But before we jump off this ship and kind of overreact about this 2021 rookie class, I just wanted to go back to the 2020 rookie class when after 2 weeks, I think people were saying, hey, where the heck has Justin Jefferson been? Justin Jefferson hasn't done anything through the first 2 weeks. Yeah. Look at where we're at now with Justin Jefferson. And, oh, by the way, I know Cameron Dantzler, he has had his ups and downs. I think I'm going to be ready. I'm ready to see more of Cameron Dantzler moving forward. Can't control the Jeff Gladney stuff, but Ezra Cleveland is a starting piece of that offensive line who they drafted in 2020. And KJ Osborne was a 5th-round pick in that 2020 draft class who didn't play. He didn't have 1 catch last season. And now he looks like he's already cemented himself as that wide receiver 3. So it's too early for me to overreact about these rookies not making a difference right now. If we get to the halfway point of the season or towards the end of the season, we're still sitting here talking about this, it might be a cause for concern. But just looking at a lot of the positions that they drafted these players at, they loaded up that defensive side of the ball with more depth pieces that probably weren't ready to be starting anyways. And on most of those positions, they also brought in free agent signings who were kind of guaranteed starting roles, like the Patrick Petersons of the world. I know they didn't draft a cornerback, but they go out and they get Delvin Tomlinson. They bring Everson Griffin and Stephen Weatherly back. They get Nick Vigil, who's playing very well right now, and they get Xavier Woods. So a lot of those rookies were drafted at those positions. And then I think Wyatt Davis is the only one that I haven't really brought up yet. And that's because Ali Udoh has kind of came out of nowhere and cemented himself in that right guard role. So it's not time to overreact quite yet. I think it could get to a point where it could become concerning, but I'm not on that ship yet.
Well, and Scott is with you, it looks like, as well. Not worried about the rookies. The losses so far have nothing to do with the 2021 class. Well, yeah, clearly they haven't played yet. So I guess that's safe to say. But this is what we do. We go in a 0-2 hole and we start throwing things in the hole. The rookies aren't doing anything. The coaches can't do it. The field goal kickers. We just continue to do that. That's what Minnesota fans do. If you haven't learned that yet, jump in. The water's warm. Partake in this interactive activity with us as well. It's just what we do because it's what we've been handed as far as fan base in Minnesota. And it goes to all sports. It's not just the Vikings. Now, Jack, on this last subject, this goes a little more out to the NFL-wide, the league-wide situation. Taunting penalties were a big issue this last week, and not really in the Minnesota game, but there was a lot of issues in the league. There's a video I'm going to pull up here in a second going around of some of these taunting penalties. It's getting a little ridiculous. It's only a matter of time before one of those is very costly at the wrong time of the game and costs a team a game. You got some thoughts on this, my man, as I pull this video up for us as well.
Yeah, it's just frustrating. I tweeted something out the second I saw this video. You hear these words thrown out all the time because the NFL is always kind of trying to limit some of these things, and it's just it almost seems as if they're actually trying to change their name from the National Football League to the No Fun League, because watching these videos as I know you're trying to get those pulled up.
Yeah,
but
you keep talking. We're going to disappear, but you can keep talking underneath it. It's just talking.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, and as you'll see in some of these here, it's just like some of these are so ridiculous. Like he just spun the ball. I think it was in front of Cleveland's bench. But watching Vikings games, you see Justin Jefferson get a first down, and I don't know if it's necessarily fair to compare what he's doing to the Jerome Simpson era in Minnesota, but he's doing the whole point thing every first down. And if he gets too close to an opposing defender, if he gets in the face and does that same point, does that whole play come back and comes back 15 yards? Like he's just flexing his muscles right there. That is a normal thing. What is the difference between a player doing that and Danielle Hunter drawing the square and kicking his legs through it? I don't understand this rule. I don't know if you have as strong of opinions on it as I do. I understand that taunting has to be a thing because there's certain instances where it is like, okay, some things were absolutely brutal, but I don't remember watching this one. And they threw a flag. I can just laugh at that. It's like, I can't, it's pathetic in my opinion. And the NFL is moving towards, like I just said, the No Fun League rather than the National Football League. It was kind of getting to a point where it seemed 2 years ago where they're like, hey, we're going to let these guys do fun dances in the end zone and kind of open things up. And now it's kind of sliding back to the other end of the spectrum where one little thing where a guy flexes on a defender, that's how football has been played for so many years. And they're trying to take that away. I understand if you like spear someone in the helmet and get up and flex over him, like Juju Smith-Schuster did a couple years back, where he like walks over someone and steps over him. That is completely different than what we just saw in that clip, and it's getting out of hand, in my opinion.
Yeah, no doubt. I got a couple thoughts on the entirety of the situation. First off, players need to know, right? You watch that video, there's basically one thing in common with every single one of those. It's the player who got the flag thrown against them getting in the face of the other player.
Yes.
You can do whatever you want. Just don't get in the face of the player, and they're not going to call it. That's the difference between the Daniil thing and all these other ones. They're just getting in the face. So make a point not to look at the player, not to look at the other team's bench, but do whatever you want to do, and you can still celebrate. As a player, you need to know that, right? I think it's still silly that they're flagging and giving infractions on these things, but you have to know that too, and you have to adjust and adapt, because at some point it will cost a team a game, right? This 15-yard taunting penalty will cost a team a game, extended drive, whatever it might be, and it'll be bad, and we'll talk about it then again too. The other thing is the double standard that the league puts out. I can't remember who I saw tweet this, but it was in week number 1. Somebody tweeted this. We throw flags for all these taunting penalties when somebody backs into the end zone or flexes over an opposing player, but we encourage players to 16 to 20 people at a time run down the field in front of a TV camera and do this stupid flex thing with this player cam or whatever that they have the last couple of years. You can't have one and the other at the same time. It just doesn't work that way. So when you have a situation where on one hand you're encouraging them to celebrate, even if they weren't on the field at the time, you're encouraging them to run down and flex in front of this camera for a cool photo op for the television, but then you flag them when they back into the end zone or smack talk somebody when they're looking them and making eye contact with them. That part of it just seems kind of silly to me.
Yeah, and like you said, it puts the players in a weird spot. They need to know that this is a thing. I'm not sticking up for the players, because if they're getting the flags, they need to figure out a way to walk away and do it in a different place, not be in the face of an opposing player. But at the end of the day, I just think it's silly. We see the NFL go back and forth on rules all the time. Not that the two are comparable, but just a couple years back when everyone in the world was trying to figure out what a catch was and what a catch wasn't. It's like now we're to the point where what's taunting and what's not taunting, because you just brought up an absolutely fantastic point. You can have an entire 53-man roster down to the end of the field and flex on TV, but the moment you make eye contact with a coach or an opposing player, it's a 15-yard penalty, and it's I don't know, it's silly. And I don't know if it necessarily stems from this. I know the Tyreek Hill peace sign was a big ordeal, and then Antoine Winfield did it back to him in the Super Bowl. So I think they wanted to limit like the interactions like that, which I kind of understand. But at the end of the day, it's a child's game that these guys are playing, and it's supposed to be about having fun and entertaining the fans. And the more flags that they start calling for silly taunting penalties, I think it's going to continue to irritate the casual fans in the NFL.
Right, and I understand they're trying to prevent an all-out brawl on the football field, right? But how often do we see that? I mean, I have one memory of, who was it? It was Cortland Finnegan, maybe?
And Andre Johnson, I think.
Johnson, but that was still, that's two players that are going man-to-man, right? It's not even the taunting. I'm sure there's some drawing, but they're going man-to-man. They're fighting with each other. They're pulling, they're hitting, they're holding, whatever, all throughout the game. And then they snap and start ripping off helmets and punching each other in the face, right? That's one example that is not this all-out brawl that you're expecting or that they're trying to prevent. So I feel like they're trying to prevent a problem that doesn't exist by enforcing these rules. And it seems like just a control thing to me over the players. And again, this is a situation where the fans want it, right? The fans want to be flexing along with their players on the field. They want to celebrate. They're doing that in the stands. It's almost encouraged by the fan bases. But on the football field, it's not allowed. And it's not only a small penalty, it's a big penalty as well. And some of them are even disqualified from the game, I think, depending on how it goes. So you're right. It's a weird situation. There's double standards up and down the football field, but it's something they need to figure out, because that highlight reel that showed, I think, 6 or 7 examples was just from this last week, just from week 2 across the league. This will cost the Kansas City Chiefs a game. This will cost the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a game. And then everyone's going to be freaking out. They're going to bump somebody from the playoffs because of something like that. I mean, stuff can happen that actually matters more than just a 15-yard penalty. So they got to figure it out. They got to figure it out now. And a lot of times too, Jack, we see this, and we'll close out after this because we've already gone 40 minutes. We see referees either come into the preseason or into the regular season really hot, and they're clearly putting a focus on a new rule. A couple of years ago, it was the crown of the helmet rule, where you lower your helmet on offense, right? And we were all worried that Adrian Peterson, how's he going to be able to play? Because that's what he does. And they called it in the preseason. They called it the first couple of weeks, and then they chilled out. They chilled out completely. The offensive pass interference, defensive pass interference, the ability to review those things, like, you see it come in hot and heavy at the beginning of the season. I'm hoping that this is one of those situations too where they've made their point, they came in and we're all talking about it, and then the rest of the season it cools off a little bit, both by the players and the referees, so that we don't see it as often. But it's an interesting talking point, Jack. We're going to tie a bow on this one. We'll be back on Thursday to preview the Minnesota Vikings and the Seattle Seahawks, the home opener for the Minnesota Vikings, back in front of fans at US Bank Stadium for the first time in a year and a half, almost 2 years. They're going to be back there, and it's going to be loud. It's going to be fun, and hopefully it'll push this team to victory. But until next week, that's Jack Day. I'm AJ Mansour. You can follow the State of Purple podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, wherever you get your favorite podcast. You can listen to it there on demand, or you can stream along with us like the lovely viewers in the comments have been doing all day today, and partake in this conversation as well. Scott Skoll, my brother. We'll see you next week on the State of Purple podcast.
10 seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop. Steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side.